So no sooner has the British flat season started than it's coming to an end. It's the finale of the flat season, British Champions Day on Saturday. Biggest day of the year, arguably, for flat racing fans. And we're going to preview it now, live on Facebook to our millions of fans.
Excellent.
And it's myself and Mr. Jamie Lynch, our Chief Correspondent.
And we're going to have a general cursory look. Not too in-depth, the declarations only came out, a few hours ago. So we've been through it as much as we can. We will be doing more in-depth stuff on the website, of course. A lot of it's already there. But I will be going as well to Ascot on Saturday. And I've got the two most important things you will need to go to Ascot on Saturday, which is A, the Timeform race card, rather than this copied version. Still, this is hot off the press. And two is the new Timeform umbrella, which I will be showcasing at some point. Nice branding there with the black. But it is going to rain. It's an important point because as we sit here now, still some 36 hours away from Champions Day, the due rain, certainly on Saturday, probably tomorrow. It will change circumstances. We will sort of cover that as best we can as we talk about these horses. But a few things to bear in mind. We're going to give it a general guide now, but there are finer points to be made between now and then.
Okay, so we're going to go through the 5 groups. Right, actually better. Look at that.
Sorry about that, everyone.
Yeah, that's more stable, isn't it? I was eyeing that up as well, thinking that's going to go at some point. So after that, we'll go straight into the first race of the day, which I believe is the Long Distance Cup. Interesting field here, and a very short one in the form of Order of St George, who is going to reoppose with Big Orange, who got the better of him at Ascot. What's the Timeform angle here?
The Timeform angle is that Order of St George is still by far and away the best horse in the race. £6 clear on Timeform ratings, which is still a lot. And it sort of tells you something about looking at him from a price perspective as well, because you say he's short, and it's true he is short, but an interesting fact with him is that in the last 2 seasons, he's been odds on every single start apart from the 2 arcs that he's contested. So the sort of impression we're trying to give is that when he's normally in this sort of company against the stays, he's usually odds on. That's not the case here because we have got a strong field, and it's a case of the past and the future. The present is all rosy for Order of St George. He's in top form right now, as we saw in the RS St Ledger and as we saw in the Arc. But the past is last year when he came on from the Arc and disappointed in this race of 4 to 6. And the presumption was then that the hard race at Chantilly had left its mark and it took the edge off him. And we've got exactly the same scenario here. So it might be that we put too much store into that, but by the same token, it is critical information for this. And when I refer to the future, I referred to the 3-year-olds because they are the new generation. And I was just thinking about the staying scene this year. In races, all-age cup races that have been open to the 3-year-olds, Rekindling won the Curragh Cup, Stradivarius won the Goodwood Cup, Desert Skyline won the Doncaster Cup. So it really is the age of the 3-year-olds. So that's the sort of where we're at right now. Order of St George is probably more the price he should be rather than being short necessarily. And a final point to make about him is that if we do get rain, more so between now and Saturday, the 2 most devastating performances of his life have come the twice he's been on soft ground, which were the 2 RS St Ledgers, which he won by 9 lengths and 7.5 lengths. So he's a really good operator when the ground is testing like it is. He's a really strong stayer. And I think that whichever way you approach this race, he is sort of front and centre in everything. And there are people out there, and I'm sort of, I've never really seen eye to eye with Order of St George, but I'm starting looking at him, look at the field, look at the conditions, look at the price and thinking, well, you know what, maybe it's the case for saying that he should be odds on again, marginally so, given that there's so much weight of evidence behind saying that he is demonstrably the best horse in the race.
It's interesting as well that you say, like, with Stradivarius, because it's billed as Order of St George against Big Orange, Rocky Balboa against Apollo Creed, but we've got Ivan Drago in Stradivarius. I'm running out of character names. So Mr T and Desert Skyline, who's a real improver as well. And then, is Dartmouth in with a shout for the Queen?
Well, he's been supplemented, hasn't he? He was never really supposed to or engaged to come here, but I think he's definitely in with a shout, even though he was miles behind Order of St George at the Curragh, because we know Dartmouth's strengths, we know his limits as well, but we know that softish ground is fine. We know that he stays well, as was proven at York when he was just touched off by Montali. And we know that in that classic Sir Michael Stoute way, he's gradually going the right way bit by bit, and you wouldn't be surprised that even though he's well into his 5-year-old season, there might still be a little bit more mileage in him at some point. Having said all that, I think the biggest threat might be this Desert Skyline, who you mentioned. I know the Big Orange beat him at Ascot, but I think Order of St George lost that rather than Big Orange won it. Those are the little foibles which have always sort of played in my mind, which I sort of see in his mind, Order of St George. And I think they've sort of learned from that as well. You know, they don't deliver them quite so late. They don't mind engaging these horses when needs be, like Big Orange. I think the whole point of Big Orange was not to get into a battle with him, but he inadvertently did, and that proved his downfall. But I think that he is a better horse than Big Orange, and I also think that 2 miles around Ascot is probably more his home territory than the 2.5 mile of the Gold Cup, which might have just sort of stretched him as well and certainly played more into Big Orange's hands. But briefly about Desert Skyline, we don't really know his limits, and the same could be said for Stradivarius, but he's got a question mark about soft ground, and I don't know whether it's by design or just by coincidence, but he's been kept away from soft ground his whole life, Stradivarius. And obviously he's given his all at Goodwood and at Doncaster, and it's quite hard to expect him to bring his A game once again. But as a Skyline, we don't quite know his limits. He'd have run the St Leger for sure had he not been a gelding, because David Ellsworth said that he's got a lot of faith in this horse and that he would have shown up there. He won the Doncaster Cup, which was a big consolation. And I just get the impression that the sort of big field, the strong gallop, Desert Skyline under Sylvester de Souza, they've sort of teamed up really well at Doncaster. It seemed like a marriage made in heaven. And he's probably the one out of all the field who, if there is a horse who's going to improve 6 or 7 pound, I think it's probably him. So sort of summing the race up, Order of St George, I'm sort of thinking the more I look at it, he probably should be 4 to 5 rather than 5 to 4. But number 2 is that if you are looking for a value play, an outsider, I'll put my weight behind Desert Skyline, because I think he's the one who we know the least about and who could improve the most.
Do you think that price thing is because he's been beaten at odds on?
I think so. Yeah. I think that's making a bit. I mean, this is a horse who's got a history, a track record of being beaten at odds on numerous times. But I think the main thing with him is that there's an assumption in his price that history is going to repeat itself and that he's going to fluff his lines at Ascot, having given his all in the Arc. But the more recent history of the sort of way his campaign has gone suggests that might be difficult or wrong to make that bare assumption.
And what we'll do very quickly is a final note for each race. I've got a piece by Ben Fernley here who lists like the best performances in recent years on time form ratings, and then asks whether it'll be beaten.
Good piece, that.
And Forgotten Rules with 1-2-1 in the long distance cup. I presume you think Order of St George potentially could blow that on the wall.
I mean, Order of St George has got probably 6 or 7 performance ratings that are higher than that already. So if Order of St George turns up the Order of St George that we sort of know and we've seen the capacity that he's got, then he's got the ability to win this comfortably and to beat that figure handsomely.
Okay, so on to the second race, the Fillies and Mare Stakes, and we've got a favourite here in the form of Journey, who was second in this last year, not been quite as good this time around. Are you a believer? Do you start believing? Do you stop believing? Where'd you go? Where'd you go with Journey?
Can I swear on Facebook Live or not?
No.
Oh, okay.
Well, I don't know, actually. Probably not.
Where do you go with Journey? Actually, how many times has she won this?
Has she won it?
Yeah.
She won it 2 years ago?
Yeah, she won 2 years ago. Yeah, there's a lot going for Journey.
She won it last year, didn't she?
Yeah, she won it once, or twice. There's a lot going for Journey in that she won it last year. There seems to be some target training going on in that. We haven't seen much of it through the summer, presumably with the autumn campaign in mind. And the third point with her, the third positive, is that run last time in the Prix Vermeil against Batil, that puts those two quite a way ahead of the pack, more so than you might think looking at the betting, or sort of familiarising yourself with these fillies and mares, in that you sort of think that they're going to be much of a muchness, but on time form terms, we've got 2 horses in Batil and Journey who are, these are like £7 ahead of the pack, which gives them lengths to spare. And obviously the rest are 3-year-olds by and large, so it could easily be that one of them will improve. But it's a really good starting point for this race to say that, hang on, the betting and sort of your initial gut impressions, which is the same for me, that this is a really competitive race. But digging down into the ratings, we've got 2 horses who are ahead of the pack, and one of them is Journey. The problem with Journey, or the one downside, is this Batil, who obviously she beat Journey last time in the Prix Vermeil. Journey made her effort slightly sooner in a strongly run race, which might have been a factor in her finishing second. She'd been off for a while before then. We mentioned that she hasn't had much of a season in terms of exposure, which again might have played a part in the finish, and she certainly travelled like all of her ability was intact. But the more rain that comes between now and Saturday, the more that this price on Batil is just going to edge down and edge down and edge down. Because the simple fact is that on what we've seen on the track, and we've got plenty to go on, she's nearly unbeatable when it's heavy ground or soft ground. Certainly against her own sex, against the fillies and mares, because just see for yourself, look at her record. The very bare surface facts tell you the story with Batil, in that she's nearly invincible when she gets her ground. So this is certainly a waiting game, and it's a watching game to see what the weather does. The French are going to be really keen to strike on Champions Day, on British Champions Day, because they drew LeBlanc, didn't they? On their big day in the Arc de Triomphe, when the British and Irish ran away with every single race. And they're running several horses here, not just Batil, but also Left Hand, who was behind Journey and Batil in that Prix Vermeil. And it's a good line in that to the Prix de l'Opera, which was won by Rhododendron, which Hydrangea, who was in here, was narrowly behind. Left Hand was beaten about half a length in a fifth that day. She was about 5 lengths behind Batil, and in second place Journey in that Prix Vermeil. So there's a very direct line which sort of proves that point I was making, that actually these two are quite a way ahead of the pack. There is one horse in there for France, the Juliet Rose, who's really interesting, just on the simple fact that she's a regular winner, she's a frequent winner. She missed most of the season to concentrate on an autumn campaign. She goes really well in soft ground, and she's the unknown quantity in this, in that she's a 4-year-old, but by the same token, she's never really gone up against these fillies before, and you might see that as a negative for her, but I'd view it more the other way and saying, well, the others haven't come up against the Juliet Rose. So she's fresh, she's certainly firing because she won on Arc Weekend on the Saturday, and she's got her ideal conditions. So outside of the big two, as we're calling them, I'd look at the Juliet Rose more than even Coronet or Hydrangea, who've got their points to prove in individual ways.
Could be a thorn among the roses then.
I'm going to get someone new to do this with next time. I can't bear Journey and the Juliet Rose.
The best performance was Journey last year, actually.
Was
121.
That'll take some topping. I mean, if Batil beats Journey this time, she's probably going to have to run to 121 or slightly more, given that the benchmark is very clear in that we know what Journey can do, and it seems like from France last time that she's going to reproduce that figure. So tactics are going to come into it, of course, because Journey, I think she sort of more or less dictated by and large last year. But the main point is the weather watch, because Batil, what sort of price now, Nick, at the minute?
Batil-ish, about 72.
She's 72 second favourite generally, as we look at it. But if it hammered down, honestly, she could go off 7-4 rather than 7-2.
For the record, Ben thinks Batil potentially could have a better, bigger.
Yeah.
But again,
it would be a conditional rating in that it would want a strong gallop and a high threshold and plenty of rain to come to make the ground in favour. But just an interesting point that the slower the ground, the more the field gets stretched out, and therefore the wider relationship between the horses and the sort of bigger divisions within the ratings. So you often get big ratings. And it's sort of, you can't do anything about it, but you're just representing the result on paper when conditions like there might be at Ascot on Saturday.
Okie dokie, on to the Sprint Stakes, which possibly is the best race of the lot, really. Harry Angel comes here and has taken all before him so far this season. Is 6-5, and I don't want to spoil for people who haven't read your piece yet, but your weekly column is all about Harry Angel this week.
Yeah, and it's not really focusing on him per se in this race, although it does conclude with that. But I promise you, I don't want to sell this. It's horrible self-selling, isn't it? But go and have a read that article, because it's not about what I've written. It's about the story that we've unearthed regarding the champion sprint scene generally this year, because there's a fascinating tale behind Harry Angel and who his youthful playmate was. So honestly, I've never seen the like of it before. I read the like of it before, and it's worth having a look at. As far as the conclusion goes, Harry Angel again, we've got another short price favourite who's ahead of the pack on ratings. Let me just ask you this question, because it sort of relates back to what we're going to, and it's just a sort of good feeling, and there's not a right or wrong answer. They're a similar price. they're a similar distance clear on ratings, they've had a similar season. Would you rather back Order of St George or Harry Angel in their respective race if you sort of had your last 50 quid on it?
That is a good question, that, because they've both got a similar level of opponents in behind as well. I think if Harry Angel appears in the way that he has at Haydock, you'd have to say Harry Angel, wouldn't you?
I sort of think that, because, Order of St George has sort of done things wrong in the past and fluffed his lines, whereas this fella never really has. And I think it's a case of less is more with him, in that the more time has gone on, the less headstrong he's become, the less sort of conditioned he's become, and the more powerful in turn that he's been. So Harry Angel had a few fault lines in him when he was sort of an embryonic racer, in that he used to pull a bit hard, he didn't used to race that efficiently. And Ballydoyle really exploited that in the Commonwealth Cup when they put Intelligence Cross right up against Harry Angel, and they sort of inadvertently teed it up, or very advertently, in fact, teed it up for Caravaggio. But you can smell, you can't even smell, you can see that the same plan is on again, because Aidan's running 3 alongside the big hitter in Caravaggio with the express intention of upsetting Harry Angel, or at least upsetting his rhythm. Now, I think we've got a very different Harry Angel now from what we had at Royal Ascot, because of he's more mature, he's more of a racer. He's less one-dimensional, I think, is the point, in that he just had sort of 2 speeds at one point, but now Adam Kirby, because of this partnership with the Forge, can ride more of a race in him. So you sort of think, how do you beat Harry Angel? You can't go up against him in a flat-out sprint, because he'll just burn you off. But by the same token, he can't sort of outfox him, because he's more tactically aware and adept these days, in that they can do different things. And think back to the July Cup, when we sort of all expected that he'd just try and blaze off and hold on, and in actual fact he just settled in behind the pace and then used that turn of foot at the end. So the sort of point I'm making with him is that there were cracks in his armour before. Those cracks aren't papered over, they are filled with the finest polyfiller now. They have been strengthened, and in fact they've almost become an advantage now, because he had to go through that to get where he is today. So with Harry Angel, is he the best horse in the race? Yes, I think so. Has he fluffed his lines? He has done in the past, but there's been reasons for it. Is he a different horse now? Absolutely so. Is he one-dimensional? Not these days. So I think that sort of every way you look at him analytically and how he's going to get beat, you're sort of left scratching your head a bit, and that's the same for the opposition.
Rather than run through each one, I'm just going to ask, who's the biggest danger with all that in mind? With the fact that the Tin Man seems to come good at this time of year, Quiet Reflection will like the going, Caravaggio, of course. Who's the one that Team Harry Angel are going to worry the most about?
Caravaggio obviously is an important horse to call out here, because he has got a defeat of Harry Angel on his dance card. The thing is that their careers have gone in separate ways, and even though Caravaggio won last time, that performance, that rating, even the style of it, suggested that he is still having a bit of a struggle, a bit of a later midlife crisis almost, because of everything he did when he was precocious. A really good draw angle in here is that so when you think about Ballydoyle and how they might try and attack Harry Angel at different stages, they've got one drawn right next to him in alphabet. Harry Angel's coming out of 9, alphabet's in 8. Caravaggio's more towards this side with Intelligence Cross, and then more towards the far side we've got Washington DC. So they're sort of spread across the track. They have got opportunity, and this is well within the rules. It's just trying to shape the race as best suits your horse, and in this case it's Caravaggio who will be finishing late. The question is, will Harry Angel be still bombing along at that point? So sort of coming back to the question of who is a potential danger, or who's a potential alternative bet from Harry Angel if you don't like it. And I'm just sort of thinking that the only way that Ballydoyle can sort of really shape this race is less so worrying about Harry Angel and more so servicing Caravaggio, who we know his style sort of really well. It's clear cut. He's a hold-up horse who takes a little while to go through the gears and then finishes strongly. So what they want is a really strongly run race. And I'm just thinking that the stronger the pace, the more that a sort of outsider finishing late with 7 furlong stamina, who's got freshness on his side and won't mind the ground. I'm looking at this Labrisa Breeze, and I'm certainly going to have a saver on him, because he's only ran 3 times this year, beaten 2 lengths in the Diamond Jubilee in his reappearance, beaten 3 lengths in a really strong Lennox Stakes, and then was second in the Hungerford last time. Sort of each step better than the last, and sort of building towards a big conclusion. So the faster they go, the more that Labrisa Breeze comes into it. And I can see him finishing third, maybe he's even second, and then obviously if Ballydoyle do go sort of headstrong against Harry Angel up front, then Labrisa Breeze could easily come all the way through, I'm thinking.
Okay, so a juicy question here to finish it. Of course, Muhara was a couple of years ago, 134. Is Harry Angel in that stratosphere?
He's in that stratosphere, he's in that ballpark. I think he's just £2 behind. Yeah, Muhara was a brilliant sprinter. He did a Harry Angel as a 3-year-old, which came all the way through to this point. Harry Angel has been brilliant so far, and if he does here what he did in the July Cup or the Spring Cup, he probably still isn't going to match Muhara's standards. So it's just interesting one to remember just how special Muhara was. We'll see his offspring on the track next year.
Possibly 3 years since, so
maybe not the year after then. Maybe he's... But Harry Angel's the most likely winner. He'll do well. I think he'll struggle to top Muhara's rating under these circumstances this day. As a 4-year-old, yeah, because he is going to come back, Harry Angel, and I can see him running to massive figures in the high 130s then. But I think he's going to win. I think he's well equipped to cope now with whatever Ballydoyle throw at him, and they will throw plenty at him. And as an alternative one, or an each way one, or a place selection, everything's set up nicely for Labrisa Breeze to be finishing late into a place.
Okay, next up is the Champion Stakes, and the key question here is just how good is Cracksman? He's 2-1.
Yeah.
Is he a Group 1 superstar? You know, they toyed with putting him in the Arc against Enable. They didn't go for it in the end. What's the time form view on Cracksman? Is he a superstar?
No, the time form view is that there's a massive explosion just waiting to happen with Cracksman. But is it going to happen? A is a 3-year-old, and B over 10 furlongs. Those are the two. Those are the big two things when you look at him in conjunction with his price, because we are dealing in about a 2-1 favourite, aren't we?
Yeah.
With Ulysses out, Cracksman is 2-1. If this was over 1.5 miles, he'd be 2-1 for sure. You back him at 2-1?
Yeah. Probably wouldn't be 2-1, would he be?
But you can just sort of hear a square peg being banged into a round hole with him, because everything about him, from his pedigree to the very, very demonstrative evidence on the track, is that 12 furlongs has made this horse. That's what it is. It hasn't just it's not that his natural improvement, it's the 12 furlong has made this horse. Now, he can run very fast, Cracksman, but as you saw at York, and especially in France, it takes him a while to go through the gears. The transmission is a bit slower, and I think that's going to improve by next year. But right now, as things stand, the transmission is fairly slow. And over 1.25 miles, with the configuration of the track in that it's quite a sharp turn and quite a short straight, he's going to be absolutely flat out on that home turn. And this is the sort of race, and he's up against the sort of horses who might just get away from him. He's going to be finishing best. He's going to be the best of these next year for sure. But at 2-1, I think that it presents an opportunity to back something else in the race.
Is the 9-2 about Barney Roy almost too obvious? Because of how he's been campaigning this year. He's lightly raced.
Yeah.
He's been brilliant. Only just done in the Eclipse. Very good in the international stakes as well. And what's key as well is the two that were in front of him aren't here. So is he the one they've got to beat in terms of the division?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that to sort of encapsulate everything you were saying there, he's got the best 1.25 mile form in the field, hasn't he? For sure. The way that he was second, just nudged out of the Eclipse, the way that he ran in the Judmont, despite sort of that, it was an inefficient ride to go head to head with Churchill from so far out. Ulysses was just rubbing his hands at that point, and obviously the relationship with Ulysses is better reflected at Sandown when there was a nose between them.
Yeah.
And there'd be plenty of people thinking, rightly so, that Ulysses would be too fast for Cracksman if he came here. Well, so you don't have to have too much of a step sideways to find Barney Roy, do you? So I think that 92 or thereabouts about Barney Roy is a big price. And if Cracksman didn't run, that he'd be 9-4 Barney Roy, wouldn't he? To beat what's left. So yeah, I think he's got the best mile and a quarter form. As you said, he's been sort of trained specifically, hasn't he, for this race. I mean, he's had lots of other targets, but he's been freshened up since York. He could have gone to the Juddmonte, he could have gone to Paris, he could have had various targets, but they've kept him fresh for this. And I think the most important point is that we talked about Harry Angel and how lessons were learnt with him, weren't there? Lessons were learnt with him of sort of what not to do in conjunction with the Ballydoyle attack. Well, lessons were learnt with Barney Roy from the Guineas, and they put it into practice at Royal Ascot when Churchill fluffed his lines, obviously, but Barney Roy was ridden differently and was a different horse. And it's the sort of same learning process that's going on here. Learn from York, put it into practice here. He's got Stall 2 to help. He's got a pacemaker in Maverick Wave for Godolphin to help. He's going to get tucked in behind the leaders, and then his finishing speed, you think, might be too much for almost anything else. So in your mind, Nick, you can sort of visualise how this race is going to go. You've got your success days of Maverick Wave pushing the pace. You've got, in probably the next wave, Barney Roy and Cracksman. And on that home turn, you'd think that Barney Roy would still be swinging and Cracksman would be flat out. And whatever edge James Doyle can get at that point in the race, it's going to be harder and harder for Cracksman just to have the time to claw it back. So yeah, it's almost keeping it simple, this race. Who's got the best mile and a quarter form? It's probably Barney Roy. He's not favourites, therefore that presents an opportunity.
So if I gave you 50 pence to put on the Champion Stakes, would it be Barney Roy, or would it be something like Highland Real, who has more Grade 1 wins than... No. Barney Roy then?
Yeah. I mean, Highland Real is an absolute hero, but his vulnerabilities have been made clear up against horses like this. And people often accuse us and say Highland Real's underrated. Well, actually, he's not underrated at all. He's the most rated horse in terms of substantial amount of evidence to rate him exactly. That's all around. It's all these other qualities that have won him those races. It's not just about ratings which win you Group 1s or any race. It's about the attitudes, about the tactics, it's about the planning and preparation. And all of those things Highland Real scores highly for. But when he's in this sort of field, life is difficult for Highland Real. And I think that he's probably going to be found out here. But that doesn't, just saying I don't fancy Highland Real doesn't mean I hate the horse at all, because I think he's an absolute hero of a horse.
Okay, we'll scrap the rating segment because there's a certain horse that's won the Champion Stakes and the QE2 that won't be topped.
Imagine if Cracksman tops Franco, tops the old man.
Yeah.
Because you think you're any good, Dad? Watch this.
Well, I mean, we'll hold our hands up, I suppose, if he does. So one to go in terms of group races, the QE2, and we've got one at the top of the market in Ribchester, who has, apart from Goldwood, has taken all before he came top of the division really in Group 1s, and then got turned over at short prices. Perhaps there was a few excuses that day, perhaps there wasn't. Where do we go here?
I think this is the best race of the day, or the most appropriate race of the day, in that this really is a championship race, a championship decider, because we've got the king of the division, which is Ribchester, and we've got the sort of rightful challengers to him. Ribchester hasn't put a foot wrong this season. I mean, the twice he was beaten was in Dubai over 9 furlongs where he didn't stay, and in Sussex where they were swimming when they for 3/4 of the way around. So you can forgive him those, and he hasn't put a foot wrong otherwise. But he's never gone up against a field like this so far this season. Ribchester is going to run to his rating. There's no doubt about that, because he's too genuine, he's too reliable, he's too well trained by Richard Fahey not to run to sort of a big 130. But the problem for him is that he's gone up against 3 3-year-olds this year. That's all he's gone up against, only 3 3-year-olds. And now he's facing some of the best 3-year-olds around from either end of the season. So we've got the Churchill from the spring, and we've got the Beat the Bank from the autumn, from the summer and the autumn. And Beat the Bank, he could be anything. This horse is absolutely slamming good fields in races, winning by 3 lengths, 5 lengths. The only time he was beaten in his whole life was on fast ground in the Jersey at Royal Ascot, which was probably a shock to the system in terms of where he was at that stage. But also he had a dirty scope afterwards. Dirty scope. So the point I'm trying to make is that Ribchester is the standard setter, but he's never gone up against 3-year-olds that he's going to face here. Churchill from the Guineas. Don't forget the Guineas was when you think back to it, you sort of think, well, that was a 2-horse race in terms of Barney Roy and Churchill. It was billed that way. But it was actually billed as a 3-horse race because Albuquerque, Andre Fabre was sort of waxing lyrical about him. And he's got loads of ability, Albuquerque. He's just got a little flaw in his makeup, but he's got cheap pieces on for the first time here. And he's the sort of horse who could still really thrive in this environment. So the point is that Ribchester, he's got a big task on his hooves here, up against the up-and-coming 3-year-olds, and I'm just really drawn to Beat the Bank. The Americans call it the big Mordaunt, the momentum, and he's got all of it because he's just growing in power and presence every single month, and he's arriving sort of in a pressure-free zone. No one expected him to be in the sort of QE2, even through the summer, and here he is with a massive chance against sort of a standard-setting but unexciting Ribchester. And the one thing about the whole betting market and shape, I cannot believe that Churchill's a shorter price than Beat the Bank, because I just think that Churchill is feeling the effects, and has done for a long time, of all the work he did, certainly in the spring. But don't forget, he had a full-on 2-year-old campaign. I just think it's caught up with him. And I watched the Irish Champion again, and just there's 2 things from that, one positive and one negative. The negative one is that I think even before he was short of room and eased up, the writing was on the wall. And if you look back at it, Ryan Moore is near the rail and he pulls his whip through and he's hitting him with the other hand because the horse is hanging. I'm pretty sure that he's hanging there, and I don't like that sign at all from Churchill. The one positive out of that race is, and it sort of surprised me on revisiting the race, is that he was 8-11 for the Irish Champion, and the boys clearly thought that the old Churchill was back. And look, Ballydoyle are too clued up, too calculating, too sort of data friendly and data believing. For all the signs told them that this Churchill was back to where he was in the spring. So
that's what I was going to ask you. What does the fact that he's in this race tell us about Churchill? Does it tell us that they've worked out that the mile is his best trip? Do they think that this is a more winnable race? Or is it just the fact that they, are we looking too much into it?
No, I think no. But the Ballydoyle themselves, it's hard to read the signs because whichever good horses they have run in the good race at the end of the season. And the question is that we have to decipher is he a minding in that this has been the prime target all along. And remember, Mindling just exploded in this race last year, and it was sort of after the event it came to light that I heard a few people say, well, I was told back in August that she was going to go for the QE2 and probably win it. So has it been a long-term plan to this point? Or is he more a Glen Eagles, who sort of a similar flash and burn early in the season and then sort of tailed off? It's hard to read between the lines. But an interesting point about him and this race is the sort of power base. It's running the straight mile, of course, which is sort of a unique test, isn't it? It's a different test from going around a bend. But you tell me the second, the favourite, second favourite, third favourite.
What, in the betting?
Yeah. Without Churchill.
Yeah.
Tell me the front 3 in the betting and I'll tell you where they're drawn.
Ribchester is 2-1.
Ribchester is drawn in 13.
Yes.
Towards the stand side.
Mm-hmm. Then you've got Beat the Bank at 5.
Beat the Bank is drawn 12 next to Ribchester.
Mm-hmm. And Albuquerque 13-2.
And Albuquerque is drawn 11.
Right.
So we've got this little triumvirate where you think the power lies 11, 12 and 13. And where's Ribchester drawn?
Churchill, you mean?
Churchill.
1.
Drawn 1. So, there's 2 things with Churchill. What sort of form is he in? And that's sort of, I think that it's more of an issue than people might make out, in that he's drawn right over on an extreme draw on the wing of the field when the main action is going to happen over here. Now, Toscanini, who is Ribchester's pacemaker in theory, is drawn 4 over there. But the last thing the Godolphin want to do is for that to make the pace for Churchill on the far side. So I think they'll have thought that through. But I'm just saying there's 2 points with Churchill, beyond the fact of the question we've all got of where's he at in his career and what sort of well-being is he in. There's the very sort of on-track environmental factor, whereas his main rivals are right on the opposite side of the track, so he's going to either have to come to them or plough a lone furrow, but either way it presents a problem for Churchill.
On a final closing note, answer this as long or as short as you like. It's currently chucking it down outside. We've had the tail end of Hurricane Ophelia.
Right.
It's rain's due at Ascot. How soft does it have to be for Here Comes When to...
No. Well, there's 2 horses on the Champions Day card. Well, there's 3 horses on the Champions Day card. Who, the sooner this comes out on Saturday, the more money's going to come for them. Number 1 is Batil, who we've talked about. 7-2 right now. I promise you that could go off 7-4 if it's really heavy. Here Comes When. Beat Ribchester when it was in the bog at Goodwood. So again, umbrella watch for him. And the other horse is our old friend Breton Rock, who just people obviously have a direct debit where if so many rainfalls, or a bot, if so much rain falls in that proximity in that area, then I'm going to put money on Breton Rock. So he'll attract support as well. And you thought, what I hope, Nick, is that we don't get to that stage because this is Champions Day. It is meant to define or decide or determine champions, and it's hard to do that in retrospect if it's heavy ground, because there's always, we want to be crowning champions on a body of work, but also on a day. The 2 horses in here, the several horses in here who you can say, yes, that's the best horse in the division, is Order of St George in the Stays, Ribchester in the Milers, because the season that he's had, and Harry Angel, would he be, in terms of champion sprinter, Batash has run the big ratings, Lady Aurelia's added a lot to the season, Marcia has obviously done what she has, so you ask who the champion sprinter is, and right now about 4 or 5 hands go up, but if Harry Angel wins 3 Group 1s, then that's the end of that argument.
Okie dokie, so nap of the day, if you had to go for one?
I think the Beat the Bank is the one prize, I really do. It's nothing against Ribchester, it's just that this is by far and away the toughest task he's had. Churchill being second favourite is the thing that sort of makes me think, well, I should be betting in this race. And the big bet, or the big horse who's attracting and tempting like a sire in the rocks, it's Beat the Bank.
Okay. Enjoy Ascot.
I
hope you don't have to swim too much.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, everyone. When's our next one of these?
Probably, we've got one with Dan and Ben about HTF next week, and then it'll be one of the big days, Betfair Chase Day.
Read my article on timeform.com. I never say that, but I don't want you to read it for my words, I want you to read it for the story, because I promise you might be wiping a tear away, you'll certainly be smiling at the end of it, hopefully, but an amazing story to do with Harry Angel and his upbringing. It'll knock your socks off.